When you hear the word propaganda, what comes to mind? Artistic leaflets falling down from the skies above? Loudspeakers blaring the latest declarations of the state? Troll farms pumping out fake news across the web? How about plants? Or the iconic show Pimp My Ride? We didn't think so, but today we find out what plants and Pimp My Ride have to do with the word propaganda. Let's go back to the 16th century, aka the 1500s. Propaganda was a term used specifically when talking about plants and biology, along with other words that share common ancestry, all stemming from the word propagare, meaning to spread. They primarily deal with something being born and shared in the real world. This same idea was used in closely related words such as propagate. Thanks to the good old Merriam-Webster, the word now means, quote, to multiply sexually or asexually, unquote. Looking at its roots in Latin, we can trace its lineage back to propago, that which propagates offspring, gets down, gets busy, puts out some seeds into the world which grow and grow and grow into something else. This same idea extends through the roots of both words. Pretty neat, right? But if the original were related to plants and biology, when did the change occur? So, there is certainly a bit more to this story, so let's take a look at it when this biological understanding changed. Pope Gregory XIII, Pope from 1572 to 1585, needed to extend the reach of the Catholic Church into pagan lands. To do so, he established the modest three cardinal group deemed Congratio de Propaganda Fide, or, as we would say in plain English, the Congregation for Propagating the Faith. Doesn't sound as cool in English, I'm not going to lie. Pope Gregory XIV took this step, the 15th, not to get them mixed up, took this a step further, making a more formal group named De Propaganda Fide in 1622. Not to be outdone, 5 years later, Pope Urban VIII created an entire college for training missionaries with this very same goal, spreading the faith to outer realms. His creation, Collegium de Propaganda. The context of the word at this time, according to scholar William Fletcher, is, quote, which is out to be propagated, unquote. Of course, relating to the ideas of faith inherent in the church at that time, not about getting busy. It didn't reach the documented English lexicon until about 1718 through a translation of a Frenchman named Theravant. Something unique about this and that, Theravant was essentially the old-timey equivalent of modern-day influencers. He was super rich, a polyglot, and a natural scientist, and he basically just traveled all over the show, writing about his travels and publishing them. The journey to Levant and its meaning still remained in the realm of faith rather than in ideological persuasion in regards to the word propaganda. Now, finally, in 1800, things began to get a little spicy. The Philadelphia paper, Aurora, cites one of the first instances that we can find the word propaganda. Now, the context has been lost to time, but the statement remains, and it reads, quote, we have thrown some useful light upon the Illuminati of Connecticut and Massachusetts, and lately upon similar propaganda in Delaware State, unquote. Hot damn! Coming right out the gate with the Illuminati claims. Get 'em! The next instant pops up in relation to the idea of a Greek revolution being discussed in the U.S. Congress in 1812, in which Daniel Webster, who would later become Secretary of State under two different administrations, talk about that guy, CV, stated, quote, it may be easy to call this resolution quixotic, the emanation of a crusading or propagandist spirit, unquote. This gentle turn in meaning has led some folks to believe that the meaning commonly understood for propaganda today originated in the United States. Others claim that it was in Europe. Regardless of the origin, it is certainly verifiable that around the time of the French Revolution, propaganda, as a tool and a pejorative, became an increasing topic of discussion. By 1843, propaganda had finally entered the big leagues. It had a fancy new meaning within the dictionaries of the time. One dictionary, a dictionary of science, literature, and art, noted the following definition, quote, 1843 dictionary from propagation of faith, but changed to application as political language as a term of reproach to secret associations for the spread of opinions and principles which are viewed by most governments with horror and aversion, unquote. Now, is it just me, or were dictionaries way more exciting back then? Scholars think that this shift in meaning could be, in part, from the growing divide between Protestant and Catholic populations, both in Europe and in the Americas. Evidence being in that primarily Catholic countries, the term still had a rather positive denotation, while in Protestant populations the word was deemed a bit more sinister. This sentiment only increased moving into the 20th century. Quote, for propaganda before the World War meant simply the means which to adherent of a political or religious faith employed to convince the unconverted. 2 years later, the word had come into the vocabulary of peasants and ditch diggers, and had begun to acquire its miasmic aura. In loose, popular usage, it meant the next thing to a damned lie, unquote. And that was Will Irwin, the author of Propaganda in the News in 1936. Now, the heated information wars of World War I and World War II led the term propaganda into what we would now consider familiar territory. Much of what was produced contained exaggeration and falsehood, although, as noted in prior episode Disinformation, sometimes the truth is deemed too strange to be real by the target audience. In the 1920s and 1930s, propaganda, the word, became closely associated with wartime rhetoric and the lingering memories of the war to end all wars, until the next war, of course. It was during World War II that a truly intelligent, diabolical, and perhaps ingenious planned-out apparatus took propaganda by the jowls and made it into the Rocky Balboa it would later become. Now, the key difference was the creation of a bona fide psychological warfare program. Learning from the mistakes of World War I, a more rational, strategic, and scientific approach was taken to the creation and dissemination of propaganda. Irwin W. Fellow noted the key differences, writing, quote, it had a higher degree of sobriety. That is, it didn't drink martinis. No, just kidding. It had fewer highly emotionally charged words. It was less moralistic, or had fewer preference statements in relation to the number of fact statements, and it included more complete relevant information, unquote. Basically, it wasn't just saying that these people that we're fighting are going to go rape your wives and become Pokemon, okay? What folks commonly deem to be state-generated propaganda hails from this era, due to the rather positive feelings about the outcome of World War II by the Allied forces. Propaganda began to lean just a little bit more toward a neutral term, when applied to others, of course. But this is only part of the story. During the period between wars, advertising became an ambient part of American culture. Perhaps this also aided in the acceptance of a more kind of gray propaganda. In the 1950s, Korean War propaganda flooded the Koreas through the airwaves and fluttered down from the skies like a beautiful butterfly. In fact, approximately 2.5 billion, that's billion with a B, billion Leaflets were dropped onto Korea during the war. In the 1960s and 1970s, propaganda found a home with rebellious groups of people trying to stick it to the man, or to stand up against systemic racism, sexism, and other social issues important during that period. Yet the term itself still maintained its form that is common to us now, a form of persuasive action. Like the G.I. Joe with the karate chop grip, people found a use for it in all niches of life. As we've seen, propaganda began as a word relating to biology, then to the church, then to the state, and now perhaps it can best be claimed by anyone with a persuasive message and an internet connection. This is now seen in the Merriam-Webster definition of the word, which reads, quote, false or misleading information spread intentionally, usually to achieve some political or economic objective, to influence public attitudes, or to hide the truth. We all now have the opportunity to be propagandists on a global scale, each and every day. What a powerful thing to consider. Today, there are many forms of propaganda, not just the handful we mentioned here. And if you stick around for future episodes, you might just get to glimpse them at play. Thanks for listening and/or watching. And until next time, we are all propagandists for some platform. We might as well make it for the betterment of society. Onward!